Hello and welcome back to another video. It is your host Reunion and I bring you yet another update on the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this update we have several developments in favor of the Russians throughout the front line in the Donetsk region. The Russians have stormed several Ukrainian positions, started to bypass major defensive points such as Volodar in the south and Toretsk in the east, not to mention Selidove southeast of Pokrovsk. These developments take place as the Russians prepare for the season to change and therefore plan on making as many advances as possible in the areas with open fields while they still can. The Ukrainians are forced to stay on the defensive. No plan has appeared to save the remaining Ukrainian soldiers of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade stuck in the defensive town of Volodar. Instead, the Russians, with their assault north of the town, are moving towards Bohoyavlenka, reaching within 3 kilometers of the outskirts of the settlement. The Ukrainians are working on setting up a new defensive line to prevent the Russians from taking advantage of the collapse of the defenses near Volodar. But the Russians have already bypassed the defenses and are now storming this very line the Ukrainians are preparing. The topography of Bohoyavlenka, which is north of Volodar, favors the Russians as they are approaching the settlement from the high ground located in the east. Once the Russian forces capture Volodar here in the south, they'll take advantage of the newly gained heights to storm the settlement from the south and Novoukrayinka from the east. We see that the high ground continues from Volodar towards Novoukrayinka and Bohoyavlenka as the red color continues in this entire area. Taking advantage of the high grounds, a Russian push from Volodar towards the Ukrainian settlements northwest of it could lead to a collapse of the next line of defense of the Ukrainians and an advance of over 10 kilometers beyond the current front lines, and would force the Ukrainians to give up several positions along this section of the front line, spanning from Velika Novosilka in the southwest to Kurahove in the northeast. The direct connection between these two settlements will be cut off. This significantly degrades the Ukrainian armed forces' defensive capabilities in the area. The Russian armed forces have also managed to capture the dachas south of Volodar, north of Pavlivka, with this footage here. The footage shows a Russian soldier waving the flag of his unit, the 430th Motorized Rifle Regiment. It is a unit that consists mainly of mobilized personnel, as it was first introduced to the war following the partial mobilization in the fall of 2022. The unit has mainly been fighting around Volodar, where its current mission is to storm the settlement itself and hold the flanks. Therefore, the 430th Motorized Rifle Regiment is the main unit fighting over the settlement. This also means that they've been fighting for a long time, and therefore once this operation is over, they would be rotated out for the next unit. The Russians' advance here to the north of Volodar, west of Vodiane, shows them capturing a few fields and a settlement here to the in between the coal mine and Bohoyavlenka. The Russians have here managed to capture a few buildings as well as the forest lines associated with the fields, and have reached the outskirts of the fortified positions near Bohoyavlenka. The Russians are also moving towards Katerinivka, where recent geolocated footage shows Ukrainian drones hitting Russian positions in the forest lines south of the settlement. The Russians are here clearing the area of Ukrainian soldiers to prepare for an assault towards the settlement. This would take place here to the south of the town in connection with an assault from Konstantinivka to the east. With the connection to Antonivka north of Katerinivka, the Russians may look to cut off the supplies to the fortified positions northwest of Konstantinivka. The Ukrainians have these fortified positions in close proximity to Kurahove and this village chain along the river line, which means that this is one where they can regularly provide a lot of resources to, and this has allowed the Ukrainians to hold these fortified positions for a very long time, despite the Russian capture of Konstantinivka and Pobieda, leaving no Ukrainian settlements in close proximity besides Antonivka. There is this road to the west of the fortified positions, which the Ukrainians can make use of to supply both of the fortified positions to the south and to the north. But one of the main supply lines would also be going through Antonivka, where the Ukrainian manpower would likely be settled. This means if the Russians manage to get rid of the Ukrainian soldiers defending these positions, they'll be able to cut off Antonivka. They'll likely be able to capture the fortified positions, as the Ukrainians would have a difficult time resupplying the manpower needed to hold the lines. In the northern flank of Selidove, recent geolocated footage shows Russian offensive operations near the gas tank just outside of the city. This has allowed the Russians to not only capture several Ukrainian positions here to the northern flank of Selidove, but also to gain full control of the road connection between Novohorodivka here in the north and through to the northern flank of Selidove. This strengthens the Russian offensive capacity in the northern flank of Selidove and the northern part of the city. The Ukrainian positions in the settlement relies on direct supply line that goes through from Pokrovsk in the north and down towards Selidove along the E50 highway, which is now under threat from the Russian forces storming the Ukrainian positions north of the settlement. In the New York section of the front line, we see that the Russians have managed to gain control over the majority of Nelipivka, which is the settlement connected to the north of New York. The Russians have here launched an offensive operations from the southern district of Toretsk to connect the eastern and western sides from Leonidivka in the west to Toretsk district in the east, gaining control over the majority of Nelipivka and pushing out the 13th Azov Brigade out of the settlement, combined with the recent operations along the fortified positions northwest of New York, securing the flank near Leonidivka. The Russians are here expanding offensive operations to cover a wider area, securing the flanks of their spearhead north of New York. The Russian operations in the area were fairly vulnerable, following the initial advance which took place under heavy fire by Ukrainian forces. The Russians managed to secure their positions against all odds and hold on until the remaining forces secured the eastern bank of the river line near Lipivka. The push allowed the Russians to hit the Ukrainian supply lines and forced the Ukrainian 13th Azov Brigade to withdraw from the settlement over fears of encirclement. The Russians took full advantage of that to capture some of these fortified positions between the two sides and gain control over the road connection between Lipivka and southern Toretsk. The Russian forces have managed to secure the eastern bank of the Serbis River line south of Stelmehivka. The Ukrainian positions on the eastern bank of the Serbis River line, moving from Stelmehivka in the north all the way down to Torske in the south, is now shrinking regularly, almost on a daily basis. This is due to the continuous Russian offensive operations along the northwest of Kreminna and west of Svetove, as the Russians continue pressuring the Ukrainian positions on the eastern bank to gain full control of it, ahead of launching operations either towards Liman or the Oskar line further north. Summing up the frontline changes, we see that the Russians have advanced on several points along the front line. Now, the interesting part is here in the direction of Kursk. Tomorrow is the first day of October, and this means a lot from some propaganda channels, including Western media, as they claim Putin ordered the military leadership to, quote, liberate, recapture Kursk by October 1st. Why do I say these who claim this are propagandists? For one fairly simple reason. The source for this quote is hearsay. The original claim comes from a Ukrainian news source called RBC Ukraine. According to them, they have a source in the political military leadership of Russia, and they claim that this person said that Putin came with this request. that the military leadership needs to regain full control over the Kursk region by October 1st. So why do I call them propagandists? Because of a rule I've set for myself. Hearsay reports can't be verified, because the source is anonymous. We can't simply ask Putin directly, did you order your military leadership to recapture Kursk by October 1st? That's simply, unfortunately, not possible for me to do. Therefore, I go by a second rule where I can verify them by myself. And this is based on two types of hearsay. There is the verifiable type and the unverifiable type. The verifiable hearsay is hearsay such as, and I am giving a hypothetical example, I quote, Ukraine will launch an offensive towards Zaporizhia by the end of the year. That is a hypothetical hearsay. This is one that is very easy to determine whether or not it is true. If it is true, we will see a Ukrainian offensive towards Zaporizhia by the end of the year. If it is not true, then we won't see it. It is verifiable. Why is it verifiable? Because it is an action, and it is an action that we can all clearly see. Now, the quote, according to this article and RBC Ukraine, is that Putin set a October 1st deadline for Kursk offensive completion. Quote, Putin has ordered the Russian army to recapture Kursk by the start of October. That is not a verifiable hearsay claim. Why? Because it is not an action, it is an outcome. Therefore, it can never be verified. If the Russians succeed and recaptures by the 1st of October, it cannot be verified. There's no verification that that was ever said. Neither is a failure of such an operation, because it just can't be verified. It is hearsay, and it is not based on an action. If instead the hearsay was Putin ordered a counteroffensive by the start of October, then that would be verifiable, because, okay, we see the Russians launched a counteroffensive in the Kursk direction, therefore it is true. But the claim is that he ordered it to be finished, and that is therefore not verifiable, because it is based on an outcome and not an action. And this unverifiable sort of hearsay falls under my second category, which is anyone who shares unverifiable hearsay has another objective with that than informing people. And another objective means likely 99 out of 100% of the cases, it is because of propaganda reasons, whether it is to promote or demote someone. And in this case, it is to, quote, embarrass Putin, as we see, such as this article here. Putin's ultimatum to his soldiers expires on Monday at midnight, the deadline set by President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, for when the Russian troops must have defeated the Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region expires. However, there is no indication that Putin's wish will come true, as fighting continues in the western Russian region, which Ukrainian forces moved into on August 6th. The Ukrainians have occupied almost 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory in the Kursk region. So this is purely a propaganda piece. There's no incentive, there's no objective of informing. It is purely to put some sort of victory in the mind of the Ukrainians. See, Putin wanted to recapture, he failed, we are powerful, we are strong, and so on. Why is this relevant? Why am I talking about this? This is for two reasons. The first one is to teach you all source criticism. The second is to think about things critically. You have to understand that people can lie, people can mislead. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda out there. I'm helping you by providing information that I have filtered through to find out and figure out what is true. But for you yourself to think about things critically, that is the ultimate goal. My goal is for you to not need to watch me. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. See you all next time.